I'll get us kicked off. Super excited for this one. And thanks, Simon, for jumping on as guest speaker on our webinar series with Adasight. In case you haven't heard about Adasight, we help companies turn data into a commercial impact, so impact on the bottom line. And especially when it comes to experimentation programs, we see if the data foundation is not right, you're kind of building on sand, or there's a lot of hiccups that come along the way. So that's typically where we come in. And we have also Expert Lens running, which is our extended expert network, and also very excited to have Simon as part of that, where we have various senior experts from top and leading companies. But enough from other sides. Over to Simon. A quick introduction there. Simon has a PhD in psychology, specifically on the thesis around decision making. You probably heard yeah, that's there. And then he worked at various companies with in the experimentation side, specifically with Booking.com, at Meta and Canva. And now started his own startup with Cherto. I hope I pronounced that right, which I'm very excited for. On where he's building up an experimentation, acting as an experimentation vendor, and yeah, very excited for that. When I hear Simon, I always learn something new myself. So very excited for the session today. And with that, I'll pass over to you, Simon. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable by hyping you up too much. So I'll pass over to you.
No, thank you. No, I love it. I really appreciate it. Um, Let me bring up my slides. It's funny, I think I've stopped actually just mentioning my PhD, but the doctor is there, so people ask. So it's sort of I'm like, oh yeah, I did do that thing. Um, so it's nice to hear. Thank you. All right, I'm going to get into it. I am not actively monitoring the chat, but I believe the Adasight team are and Finn is. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I love the Adasight team. We do some great work together. And yeah, so feel free to drop chat in as we go. I'm going to try and the whole point is to talk relatively quickly so that there is time for Q&A and it's like a fairly casual thing. We don't need to go way up to the deadline. And today, this evening, this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are in the world, I'm in Sydney. It's my evening. I just put my girls to bed. It is a topic that I love talking about, which is what do I see world-class, high-velocity experimentation teams doing differently to most other businesses around the world? And I think some of the context there Gregor gave, I helped lead and build the experimentation platforms and programs at these tech companies here that Gregor mentioned around the world, as well as after having done that, spending some time consulting for other predominantly large and enterprise businesses who, say, wanted to run experimentation and growth programs like these companies, but just didn't quite know how. And so a lot of what I teach companies when I consult is what's distilled in some of these core lessons here. Obviously, this is a really narrowed down version, but I hope you find it interesting if you yourself are trying to scale a program in a business. And yeah, like Gregor mentioned, my current focus is building a product called Cherto. It's still a little bit in stealth, but if you want to discuss it, you can go and sign up for a waitlist, or you can just come and chat. Find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message. I am very friendly. All right. There's 5 lessons. I was sort of sneaky. It's like 2 buckets, but there's 5 here. And the 2 themes that I think tie it all together are high velocity teams that get more shots on goal. And we're going to go through the 3 big things I see them do to achieve that. And they make those shots count, right? That's pretty much all there is to it. If you want to innovate and you want to grow through experimentation, you need a lot of shots on goal and you need those shots to count. So let's start with getting shots on goal. The first lesson is really why high velocity teams do this, why big companies run lots of experiments. And it's because they plan for failure. It's really a mindset thing. And just so you know, the way I've structured this each lesson, I'm just going to start here. I'll give you some examples that I've seen first to like make it clear, and then I'll talk a little more about it. So like what does plan for failure mean? If you look at the published rates, many of you might have seen this or feel this or know this. I'm sure you feel it if you've run experimentation. When you look at the big programs that publish openly, they report success rates in their experiment programs of around the 10%. Microsoft is this interesting outlier in this pool, but regardless, I think it's pretty fair to say, and of all the programs I've worked across, it's usually in this range. And that's pretty low, right? That's on average 1 in 10 ideas actually achieving what you want. So it's not surprising as well, if you know you're going to fail a lot, you need to try a lot, right? And so these companies run tens, if not hundreds of thousands of experiments per year. And you can compare that to one of the reported averages of experimenting companies is about 34 experiments per year. Now, of course, huge difference between like most companies and being Meta or Microsoft, right? Like there's big traffic differences, there's big team differences. I'm not going to pretend every company should be running tens or hundreds of thousands of experiments. But 34 is a pretty small number when you think on average, maybe 1 in 10 of those things succeed. So if you're in a business running, say, 30 experiments a year, that means you're going to have like 3 successes a year on average if you do everything right. That's not many. So that's the first lesson here is plan for failure. And that really means 2 things, right? Treat failure as the default. This is a great cultural thing, by the way, like shifting the idea of failure from a bad thing to the norm is a wonderful cultural thing, like just being free to fail because it's normal. And then what you reward is people who figure out how to get from failure through to wins. And when you bring this mindset to like, okay, failure is the default, you automatically think, well, I've got to try a lot more stuff because chances are my ideas aren't going to follow through. So high velocity teams they'll run multivariant experiments a lot more. They'll rarely do A/B, they'll do ABC, so on, blah, blah, blah. They'll do that a lot more. The other thing is rather than like perfectly prioritizing and crafting ideas, they'll regularly just come up with like many rough ideas and run them all as experiments. So this is the first big leap into running more experiments. I told Finn I have a bad habit of checking the chat. And I'm doing it right now. I see Greg is like, yes, it's very timely World Cup analogy that was purely coincidental or maybe something in my brain. Emily, I do not have, sorry, I had no intent of defining success or failure here. Very high level success just means like significantly positive on the primary metric and a launch or ship decision following it. But I will continue. So getting shots on goal, plan for failure, like test way more. The other thing that a lot of these teams will do is they test everything. Like every little change that goes out to customers goes through an experiment, goes through an A/B test. And this is a really spicy one. I see a lot of people debating this one. It is my default piece of advice, but I will show you why I think that's and also where I think the debate arises and why I'm comfortable with it. So just some examples of things that people ship that they don't expect. Like they're very small things that many companies will just ship without going through experimentation. On the left is an example of a win that most companies probably would have missed. So in this case, it's a published example from Bing where they just very slightly tweaked colors. Like, I mean, really slightly. You can go and check out the article. It's like this little shade of blue gets a little bit darker, but it just increases the contrast. The outcome was incremental tens of millions of dollars for the company per year. That's a nice case. That's like, you don't want to miss these small things. The far more common case is the case on the right, which is you just ship things that have completely unintended consequences because businesses and customers are complicated and people make mistakes and these things happen. So I had a very large tech company. They had an event coming up and leadership wanted a promotion pop up to come through the product to remind people about the event, and they just shipped it. And About 3 weeks later, someone was looking at the top line revenue reporting and just noticed the whole thing had dropped for 3 weeks, just flat dropped, not to zero, but like there was a big dent, right? What had happened was that banner accidentally was sitting over some of their main revenue nudges, and they were being completely missed. And so millions of dollars of revenue were lost through those weeks just because it didn't go through a test. Very, I've seen so many bugs I can't count. So the reason these teams test everything, and the reason I always suggest to test everything, is that small changes do swing metrics positively, negatively all the time, and it's very, very hard to predict when it's going to happen. So generally teams will test everything because they don't want to miss the wins. But it's also a layer of a business immune system where they catch like egregious bugs and breaks. And where I think the debate comes up around this idea of test everything is that sometimes I think people interpret this as meaning I or others are suggesting every experiment should be perfectly rigorously designed. That is not at all what I suggest. It's just as you ship, to put something through an A/B release, at least for like a day or two, to catch the really big stuff. So getting more shots on goals, planning for failure, testing lots of ideas. Also just test everything. Don't let anything go out without an experiment. Last one here. Easy, making plenty of time. The whole point was to have lots of time after this for spicy discussion. Is to take steps, not leaps. So it's common, I see teams want to evolve a part of their product or their service quite dramatically. Like they have a vision for something that's quite different from how it exists today. This happens quite a lot. There are lots of ways to deal with it. But generally, I find that of all the incidents I've seen of this, they typically lead to failed experiences and negatively impacting the business. This is a published example from Facebook. They had a lot of thinking around releasing a second feed in the product. And when they did test this in select markets, they found engagement dropped by 60 to 80%. That is massive. So luckily they tested it. Another example was while I was working at Booking.com, they had a strategic shift from selling just accommodation to selling all sorts of travel experiences, so accommodation and flights and car rentals and so on. It was a really important strategic shift for the business, right? This was the direction they were going, so it wasn't like they were going to stop this, but they tried to make this jump just cold, like from where they were to the new experience, and it consistently tanked all the booking metrics, all the revenue. And so they had to step back and like work through meaningful milestones to eventually find their way to a successful version of this change. And I see it a lot. Basically, anytime you take a big leap in a business, things tend to go worse. I know there's cute stories around LinkedIn of like this company like 10x their revenue. I don't know. Maybe sometimes it's physical products like soda cans and stuff, but generally here we're speaking about digital products with high traffic. So the takeaway, to get more shots on goal, when you're encountering these big vision shifts, which are very legitimate, I think like many businesses often require these shifts, I still recommend, and I see great teams taking smaller steps to get there. And there's a bunch of reasons why I think it fails. My belief is that generally when you have a business, we're not talking about startups and scale-ups here, right? We're talking about businesses with like reliable, predictable sort of traffic and revenue. That reliability comes from many dependencies in the world. Your customers have a very specific expectation of your business and your product. And when you take these big leaps, you break a lot of the things that got your business to where it is. That's my interpretation. So I find when you are trying to make big leaps, the best thing teams can do is break it down into meaningful steps where you can test the things that matter along the way. And part of that is taking your customers on that journey through the product change as well. Like customers need time to go from here to here as well. Even if the thing you're building over here is fantastic, the rest of the world needs time to catch up. So break it down. And as best you can, isolate the parts of the change that you want to learn from. When you try to change too much at once, and things are neutral or it goes negative, it's very hard to isolate why that was. So as best you can, try to isolate the changes as you go. But this is also how you turn one big experiment into the like many milestone experiments. Cool. All right, shots on goal. Thank you, Gerger, for the FIFA shout out. Try to get lots of shots on goal. So plan for failure. That's like test lots of things. I'm forgetting my own lessons at the moment, as I do. Right, test everything. You know, when you're talking and your brain just sort of freezes, so that's what just happened. Right, test everything. Don't let things disappear, and do break big ideas down into smaller chunks. Those will help you get way more shots on goal. Cool. I think that's the idea of running more experiments is not this like the most complicated, like everyone sort of gets this, whether they think, I don't think it shouldn't be a target in and of itself, right? There's also debate around the idea that running lots of experiments is the end goal. Definitely not. But it is a necessary condition to innovate, and to develop good growth programs because failure is so common. The second part of the talk is on how to make those shots count. This is a much more nuanced topic. I only have 2 lessons in here, but they are, I think, far more complicated than the other 3. They're harder to imagine or to put into practice if you've not seen it. So I will do my best to articulate it. I would definitely welcome, if you're curious in these, reach out to me or the Adasight team to talk more about it. But let's get into it. So the best teams that I've worked with and the things that I will always hammer the teams I work with, if anyone here has worked with me, they'll hear me ask this a lot, is you must always ask yourself why and try to drill down and down into the assumptions behind the tests and the changes that you're making. Assumptions are just everywhere and they ruin great testing programs. So I'll give you just a couple of favorite examples from my world. This one was from Canva. I mean, most people are familiar with Canva, but just in case you're not, a visual communication software, and part of the beauty and power of it is it provides a lot of templates, right? You can go in and like get started designing with stuff really quickly. And as you could probably imagine in a business like this, the distribution of template usage is very skewed. Like there's some really great templates that get used a lot, and there's a whole bunch that almost never get used. And the data was very clear on this, and the engineering team was saying like, hey, look, all these templates that aren't being used, they require a whole lot of engineering to maintain, to serve. We have to do a lot of work to maintain performance of the site and keep it delightful. Why don't we just get rid of it? And so there was quite an assumption here that just because people don't use them meant that they weren't useful. Luckily, the team ran it through an experiment, an A/B test, because they just had this test everything mindset, make sure. Turns out that removing them significantly degraded engagement with the product and the business. And they went on to test a series of hypotheses, right? But I think it loosely came down to like decision making requires contrast, right? So it's easier to make a decision when you have a good and a bad option next to each other. And so having those templates, despite the fact they weren't used, was still valuable to help customers make decisions and get designing faster. Another favorite from booking.com was there was a section of the old product. I think like it might have been this section on the screen here, but anyway, it was something like this. And there was a team that were given the mandate to like optimize this part of the product. Like do everything you can to increase, how easily it helps customers make bookings and so on. And they spent ages optimizing this, like almost a year, trying everything they could, trying copy changes, design changes, layout. They changed the machine learning algorithms behind it, and nothing really worked until someone, an old colleague who was very smart, piped up and was like, hey, has anyone questioned the assumption that customers actually care about this part of the product? And so they ran an experiment just removing it from the product experience, and that was the biggest win they'd seen all year. And that is one of my favorite. I have used that tactic so many times with businesses where they're working, grinding on something, and I say, hey, has anyone validated that customers care about this? And I push the teams to remove it. And it is far more frequently than you might imagine the biggest gain that the team ever sees. Um, so these assumptions are always underneath what we're doing, and the faster you can get to them and test them, usually the faster you'll get to where the real wins are. So when you're taking lots of shots, just remember as you're trying things, force yourself and force others around you to ask why. Why do we think this will be impactful? If you can do that, and you can drill yourself down through the layers of the assumptions that you're standing on, you're going to get down to the root causes. And then the other thing is, once you get to those root causes, you don't need to design experiments to lead to a better outcome, right? You don't need to design winners in inverted commas. What you should be trying to do is design experiments that test the hypothesis. You're trying to move a needle, see if you can shift a metric. If removing something leads to significantly negative outcomes, you know that thing is valuable and you know spending time on it is going to be worth it, right? So you're testing assumptions to learn. So when you're spraying out these hundreds or thousands of experiments, you're spraying them in the right direction. Cool. Last lesson. Optimize the business, not the button. Sorry, this was like the cute title. But generally, I'll show you the examples in a minute, but it's very, very common that in businesses you'll be given a particular scope of ownership. And it's very easy to fall into a situation where you or the people in the team start to optimize some very, very local thing, and they lose sight of the broader business. And that often leads to poor outcomes for everyone. So, two favorite examples. This one I've seen far more than I wish I had seen. Every time I work with a customer service team, someone somewhere has decided that in order to have less customer support tickets in the business, they will hide the phone number to customer support. Like this happens everywhere I go. And I get it. It's a brilliant idea because yeah, it really reduces tickets. If you make it impossible for people to find the number to call, surprise, no one calls. The problem is often when you follow the cohorts of customers who've gone through this experience, negative outcomes happen later, right? Like retention drops or lifetime value drops, revenue drops. And the challenge here is the team is optimizing for a very local metric without consideration of the broader business. And this is quite a high level example, so I'll talk about the measurement problems here, but one example. Another high level example of this, I've seen a couple of times, is in a multi-product company. And there's a team who are responsible for driving growth of a particular vertical. And they'll do that often very well. And I've seen this done really well. But the worst version of this that I saw is this growth in their vertical was not bringing incremental business. It was cannibalizing customers and revenue from other verticals that were higher margin products. And so while they were being very successful in growing the number of sales in their vertical, they were ultimately reducing profits of the business. Again, they were optimizing locally and not thinking broadly. Now, these are two very high level examples. I think the worst and most common cases of this are when a team own like a single page or a single part of a funnel, and they're optimizing literally the last click or cycle or behavior that they have as their scope, like the click to the next page or the conversion rate to the next part of the funnel. This is really dangerous to do without at least having guardrails around what happens further down the funnel or further down those pages. I said it before, I'd mentioned that measurement is an issue, and I totally get that. Sometimes you don't have the statistical power or time to measure the lagging effects. And I totally understand that's a constraint sometimes, but never go into these things blindly without at least guardrailing on things that happen down the funnel or wider in the business. Because these things happen a lot. It's really easy. So when it comes to the best teams I've seen in the space and the teams that I always coach, it's a matter of finding the best way to optimize for the business, not the button. Two really quick things that I love to try and achieve this is, as much as you can, use global metrics, like metrics that are closer to overall business outcomes and value than like local behaviors like clicks or near experiment conversion rates. Like I said, dealing with the measurement constraints you have. And then this other one is my favorite fun one, is ignore ownership. One of my favorite side effects of getting lots of teams to share global business metrics is suddenly everyone's goals become aligned rather than you own this and you own this and you own this, and we all have our little walls between us. When you share a business metric, you can play in other people's spaces. So you might have an idea that you think, oh, if we could make a change on that page or that part of the product over there to match with ours, that could be really cool. And you can go to that other team, and usually if you share the same goal, it's a very easy discussion. But when you have conflicting goals and your ownership is walled off as well, then it's a very hard discussion to go, hey, we want to go and play in your space. Can we do this? And they go, no, because that's going to harm our metric. And I say ignore ownership here because if you're, say, the first person in your company or the first team who want to really push for this change, sometimes you just need to go and step on other people's toes. And teams I work with will hear me say over and over again, ask for forgiveness, not for permission, because I encourage them to be a little bit naughty. And sometimes that's required in order to make some noise and show people the power of actually cross-team collaboration. Shocker. So this is the 5 in one screen. It is a summary. I think if I'm right, Finn, I mean, the recording's going out. Hopefully there's nothing easy to forget here, but they're the two big things, right? Getting more shots on goal. I see Finn nodding. Thank you, Finn. If you want to innovate at massive velocity, you need more shots on goal because most shots will fail. And you really need to make them count. And this is where you really have to dig super deep into the assumptions behind what you're testing and think very carefully about how you're optimizing for the business, not some local thing that you've been assigned, as best you can. I'm fully aware businesses have constraints and politics and all of that, so I'm not going to look down on you if you're not able to do it. Don't worry. I'm just trying to offer a different way of doing things if you're stuck. That's all I had. Oh, we like nailed the half hour, right? So I think it's free Q&A. Of course, if you want to come find me and chat with me, there's a whole bunch of links. You're welcome to it. Otherwise, I'll leave this up briefly and then I'll turn it off in a couple minutes. But drop questions in the chat or feel free to unmute as you. Or Gregor is unmuted. Maybe he wants to say something.
I just want to kick off with one question, as maybe people are still thinking about if they have something that what they want to ask. From my side, really a lot of good pieces there. Particularly liked just have you tried removing it? So it's like not optimizing around the item, but just like trying removing it. I really liked. Maybe one question on the test everything. I think there's a lot of really strong arguments to make, like, hey, just test everything for various reasons. But what if there's the objection, which is very common, we don't have the resources, we just want to launch it. Like, what have you seen work very like practically, like to mitigate those and address those objections?
Yeah, it's a spicy one. Again, I'm not going to pretend like everyone can do it, right? I'm just sharing the best practices that I would try and push for. And it very much depends on the relationships and dynamics in your business. I think when a team says we don't have resources or time, um, usually they are picturing like the fully rigorous experiment process. This is what I find. They usually have this in their head. They're like, oh, getting experimentation set up is going to take weeks, and like then we got to run it for weeks and blah blah blah. If it's, say, an engineering team, usually they will have feature flags around anyway and be like, let's just treat it like an 1 day. Yeah, I use their language, right? I would usually talk to them about it as being a canary deployment. Be like, think of it as a canary deployment, but you're measuring customer outcomes. Usually, like speaking their language helps. If you're in a team without engineering and everything's like visual editor and this sort of thing, that's different, right? That's a different type of world. Like you, every little change is not a production change anyway. So it's a totally different argument. In that case, you need end resources. Um, but yeah, and then it's also a matter of you've got to be the advocate in your business and find the stories and tell the stories, right? I've got a couple here of like big wins and big losses. You need to make it viscerally concrete for the people in your company. Like look for examples where things did go wrong and remind people, be like, hey, look, if we spend 5 minutes setting up this feature flag, we're going to save ourselves, X. Um, and then there's a whole long story around like the politics of this, right? Like you got to find the teams who are most invested first, show wins on the board, blah, 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 like that sort of thing. So that's the long, boring answer, but I hope I'm getting at what you were thinking.
Yeah, definitely. That some helpful tactical things. Yeah, like it.
Yeah, cool.
Anybody else who's comfortable coming off mute or also drop something in chat? Maybe you're dialing it from mobile or something and you cannot come off screen or yeah. Yep, go for it, Emily.
Yeah, go for it.
Hello, thank you for that, Simon. That's awesome.
Hi.
I'm coming from like a psychology PhD background too. So my question is, when you're running kind of ABC and multivariate tests, how do you handle like interaction effects between changes? Are there like patterns or heuristics that you use to decide what's safe to test together versus what should be done in isolation?
Yeah, so if you're running many experiments like overlapping, yeah. So I get this question a lot. And a lot of the businesses I worked with have had like an innate fear or caution around the risk of interactions. Um, by and large, the evidence that comes out from big programs that overlap everything are is that interactions in these commercial settings are extremely rare. And so my default advice always is, excuse me. So there's two defaults you can pick, right? You can pick the like, we're scared of interactions, let's not do interactions. Or you can default to like, who cares about interactions? Let's let everything overlap. I mean, these are extremes, but I would always default to the extreme of let everything overlap because A, the evidence of interactions in these settings is super rare. And B, um, this depends a little bit on your tech, but depending on how fearful or worried people are, I have repeatedly built systems to just check live traffic and for any problematic interactions. There's like some pretty easy steps, right? You just check for starters, like which experiments have a lot of traffic overlap, and then you just like look there. Um, that guardrail is enough to alleviate most people to be like, look, interactions are rare, but if it happens, we'll catch it within like a day and we'll talk um, between teams. If you can get to a place like that, you can like, I've seen teams like 10x their experiment velocity just by unlocking that mindset. And that's where you would know from a psych background, right? When you then do the interaction checks, if you think there's something risky, you can take like a regression or an ANOVA approach and check for like negative interactions. It's like a super nice, easy statistical approach. Yeah, hope that answers.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Simon. I have another
Yeah,
question, but I'll open the floor.
sure. I can stop sharing my screen as well.
think I saw briefly somebody coming off mute in the attendees. If not, I would say Emily, just shoot your second one.
Thanks, Gregor. Yeah, so like Gregor said, I loved your example where the biggest win came from like removing the thing the team had spent a year optimizing. I was thinking from a psych perspective, how do you kind of surface those, do customers even care assumptions before teams sink kind of months into this local optimization?
Yeah, yeah, it's really good. I mean, that's like the breaking the psychological barrier of teams in general to remove something is a big thing in itself. So like there is a level of maturity and willingness to take risks required to do those sort of experiments. Um, I think the most common scenario where I bring it up is when I hear a team discussing a really complicated solution. So I use it more as a braking function. Like the classic one I see is personalization. Teams are like, oh, we should be personalizing this thing, like personalizing this messaging, personalizing this page. And right now, today, they have like a static single version. I'm like, okay, chill your beans. What you're talking about here is like machine learning, AI, like at scale, and A, like, do you have the people who can do this? B, like, do you appreciate how much this is going to cost you? C, like, this is really complicated. Why don't, crazy idea, before you invest months, if not years, and people burning out and a ton of money on something that's probably not going to work, remove the damn thing. And like classic is email campaigns. They're like, oh, we should be personalizing emails. I'm like, try not sending the email. Um, and usually, if they don't do it, it at least gets them to think, and it gives me an opening to explain why. I'm like, look, what you're proposing is something incredibly complicated and complex. It's likely to fail. You're going to cost the team a lot of, like the business a lot, and you guys aren't going to deliver wins. Like that's on you and your promotion if you want it. If they don't want to try turning it off, I always recommend taking a much like that's the break it into small milestones. I'm like, look, rather than shooting for like personalization, why don't we try just 2 segments? You know, so that's like the common time I will inject it when I'm worried that a team is investing too heavily without realizing. But yeah, it's a risk. Like some people are just too afraid, and I get that. Like some businesses aren't risk, they don't have that risk tolerance.
That's great. Thanks, Simon. That
Yeah.
personalization thing is really resonating on in like a startup I'm working with. We're looking into profiles and personalization, and we're a team of 4. So I'm
Yeah.
like, let's wait, let's chill.
Yeah. And look, it can be great. And startups can be a little bit different because you don't even have product market fit. Like you're like really exploring. Generally, I'm talking about established
Yeah,
business.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Can also imagine asking the person who maybe launched the feature we're talking about last year, and then like, hey, just remove it. Let's see if it can also be personal
Yeah.
investment. So
It's like all of these lessons, whatever, behind it, I guess behind it as well, which makes it difficult to implement in a lot of businesses is there's just psychology here. There's ego, there's culture, there's leadership, politics. These are things like I'm not going to pretend to sit here and present in slides and be like, here's the ultimate solution. It's really hard. Um, but these are things that if you can try to find a way towards, they're very valuable.
Mm. Could I ask another question?
Yeah,
you got
sure.
time. Yeah.
You mentioned making failure like the default and needing more shots on goal. Um, what have you seen actually shift culture from like we're scared of failed experiments to being like we're proud of learning even if the needle doesn't move?
Yeah. There's a few things. I think the thing that is that I most commonly see work is shifting the focus from failure as failure, right, to like learning opportunity. So if you can get a team, you can work deeply with a team, be like, look, we're going to try these 5 to 10 things. Like, screw everything else. I always get people to focus, right? Like, let's focus on a couple of big ideas and like try a few things out. And they can all be neutral, which is the most common case. Maybe you get a negative, and people get bummed out, and you're like, whoa, this is awesome because everyone else in the business thought this was a good idea. Now we know we have enough evidence to go, this is not worth anyone's time. Let's pivot. And I think people, once you position it in a way of like, hey, we're making like a strategic shift here based on data, even though we haven't delivered a win yet, that tends to get people, I find, tends to get people more motivated and excited because they're like, oh, I get it now. This is data-driven decision making. Like, lack of signal is just as valuable as signal. That's my experience. I mean, everyone here has probably got their own experiences on this as well. So yeah, that's mine.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, pleasure.
See, we just got one question in chat.
Good question. Okay, I'm just going to read it out to make sure I understand. But what's the average percentage rate of experiments? I'll also read it for the recording because I don't know if the chat goes. What's the average percentage rate of experiments with rolled out treatments when impact is rather neutral, but the team or owner just makes a call based on gut feeling, overall vision? Yeah, that really depends, like company to company. It depends on as well, I think, the leadership expectations of that team. So I've worked in companies where leadership lean heavily on your experimentation outcomes, and if you're just shipping neutrals, they tear you apart. I've worked in companies where the leaders couldn't care less about the experiment outcomes, and they're just like, ship it. And then they praise you because you ship more stuff. So um, I don't know if I mean, I'm sure there's an average. I don't know what it is, and I just see it vary pretty dramatically. I think if you're in a position where you would like to improve, like increase the experimentation culture in your company, but you're seeing a lot of this, yeah, I don't know if that's the motivation for the question, but I'm going to answer it that way anyway. My big piece of advice is try not to judge or demean that team. Cool. That's the thumbs up. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very natural for those of us who are trying to push for better practice to like get into a negative position with a team like that, where like you're not doing it right, or you should be doing it this way, or like you're just making decisions blindly. Not everyone does, but I see it a lot. If you can try to just help them find wins and lean on the wins, and over time they'll move away from the neutrals. But it's a slower, more energy draining process than just getting angry and shouting at them, but it is more successful. So that's a small piece of advice there. I'll move on to David's comment. I'm just going to go through the chat a little. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. No, that's all good. Don't worry about posting in chat. Wondering if I advise experience or thoughts on experimentation with small user volumes, so something like launching a new mobile game when new users trickle slowly per day or week. I know usually the answer is just not going to get a proper reading learning, but I was curious to also hear from your perspective. Yeah, I get asked this a lot. It's like, how do I experiment in low traffic situations? So 100% like you're constrained in the sense that you're unlikely to be able to run properly rigorous A/B tests and experiments unless you have like larger traffic volumes. There's probably two pieces of advice I go with here. One is similar to that like test everything lesson is it's really just about building the muscle of running experiments, even if they're not perfectly rigorous. So run an A/B test, but keep it lightweight, focus on like more sensitive metrics like behavioral things. You're not going to really measure impacts on the large business metrics, or very rarely. And don't invest too much in like the pure decision making around experiments, excuse me. I think it's just good to practice running experiments as a team, as your business or the situation you're in grows. It's also good in case something really seriously negative happens. At least you'll have a data point. But also in that situation as well, it's a matter of like triangulating evidence. So maybe you run a lightweight A/B test. Maybe you're just like looking at time logs. Maybe you're using analytics. You're doing qual analysis. Like in those scenarios, you're doing a lot more synthesis across data points than you're able to like do these pure A/B tests. So I know it's not the most satisfying answer, but that's usually the right thing in those scenarios. There are some fancy statistical techniques you can use to like boost your power and that sort of thing, but unless there's a serious need to try do that path, I wouldn't recommend it. I hope that answers your question. Feel free to throw something else in chat if you have any follow-ups. Awesome, thank you. Oh, Gregor, you were replying to my comment before about the feature factory. Yeah, more's better, right? Yeah. I think the funny thing is, sorry, this is a really side comment, but on the feature factory thing, it's like now that AI has made everyone an engineer, it's like the world has suddenly realized that it's important to measure outcomes instead of output. And it's like, I think our community and experimentation have just known this forever, but it's now thank you AI for making it obvious. Emily, I haven't talked much about Cherto. What problem am I trying to solve? Yeah, so I will be light on details here because a lot of it is still in stealth, but maybe privately, I'd be happy to talk. I think the big thing that runs common to the topics I'm talking about today is that it is very hard, I see, for many companies to scale their experimentation programs. Even with the tools that are available to them today. And I've built many of the in-house tools, like the cutting edge tools. I've worked with many of the on-market tools, and I have always found them to fall short in terms of facilitating experimentation at scale. So I will leave that little mystery with you, and happy to follow up another time. I'll take the response. Anything else, either in chat or on the call?
I have a question.
Hey, Andy. Yeah, shoot.
Thanks, for the talk and staying on for lots of Q&A. So my question is a bit around the cannibalization, kind of like lesson example that you shared, where it's stealing from like other product verticals. When you are measuring tests and say you have like a number of product verticals, you're going to have many more metrics, and then I guess you increase the risk of like metrics going up and down, and some of them being like false positives. And the more metrics you add, the more risk there is. How do you kind of like balance that with trying to make sure you've got this like picture of all the metrics you could be impacting with an A/B test, and just kind of getting stuck because like the metrics aren't all going to go up every single test that you have. That would be a miracle. But how would you kind of balance that as well as still monitoring like the cannibalization?
Yeah, good question. I have two immediate thoughts on this, two immediate answers. The first is like a boring one that I don't think many people are going to be able to think about, so I'll mention it quickly and get it out of the way. Is there statistical methods for controlling false positive rates? Good experimentation platforms have this baked in. It's called family-wise error control. But unless you're a statistician, we probably won't talk more about that. It also reduces your power on the metrics you care about. So it's a complicated topic. I think the better general thing for teams to follow is to very mindfully use buckets or categories of experiments. So I think it's commonly talked about, but not, yeah, Emily. I know it's good, right? Sorry, Emily left a comment. Recording can't see this. It's probably commonly talked about depending on the platform you're using or how you're doing experimentation. It may not be concretely in front of you, but I would always have like primary, secondary, guardrail, and exploring or learning metrics as a minimum set of buckets. And then you pick the metrics in those buckets for your use case. So primary is typically one metric that's like the decision-making metric for you. Ideally, that's a generally shared business metric if you have the power and traffic to move it. But if not, that might be, say, your product vertical metric, right? Secondary metrics tend to be behavioral metrics that are really close to the change that you're making to test that customers react the way you do. And then it's really the job of the guardrails to help you protect from cannibalization. So if you have like other product verticals, you might have their primary metrics in your guardrails. This means you can ascribe different decision criteria very clearly to each bucket. You're like, we will ship if the primary is positive and none of the guardrails are negative. So this is like a really nice way to do it, right? There's a whole world of like complications in terms of statistical choices. Like, do you have a different statistical test per bucket? Do you use like something called a non-inferiority test here? Or like, we could talk to the cows come home about those choices. But I think in general, if you have the hygiene of like these categories and their meanings for your decision, and you do your best to align with the other high level units in your business on what those guardrails should be for everyone, that's already like a way better place than most people are in. That's my view. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think we have the structure of primary, secondary, and guardrail metrics.
Yeah.
But I think we tend to just lump all of the product vertical, the high level stuff into primary.
Yeah.
But I feel like the way you've organized it to potentially put the other verticals in the guardrail makes a bit more sense.
Cool.
So yeah, no, that's really helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else? We're getting close to time, so don't stress. Oh, David, in the chat, any recommendations on a good AB book besides the Hippo book? Somebody else. Yeah, I know that's sort of the go-to, right? I am not writing one, though I love that you think I might be. I appreciate that.
Probably
Someone
starting
was
a company and writing a book at the same time might be
yeah,
just
yeah.
certain.
I got very close, I'll admit, but not probably not along these lines. I don't know, someone was asking me as well for any good course recommendation, like CRO course recommendations outside like CXL and another. I'm like, when it comes to these sort of trainings, I don't know, I think we're like a sadly underserved discipline. I really can't think of that many in the space. And I don't have a good answer to your question, David. Like, I'm sure there are. Like, I've seen there's people. I'll be totally honest. I'm not a great book reader, so it's probably not the best question for me. I read a lot of blogs and like this sort of thing. So, who was it? Maybe it was Kevin Anderson. Maybe who published someone in the field who published like a list of their favorite books, and I remember they had like 5. So there's obviously better books out there, but I'm sorry, I'm not the person to make these recommendations. It's a really crappy answer, isn't it? Yeah, I assume, Emily, that that's the book David's talking about.
Perfect. Then I think we can wrap it up here. Lots of great insights, a lot of good engagement. I was not sure if we're gonna fill the full half hour of Q&A. That's a special one. So thanks a lot there for all the engagement, and thank you, Simon, for putting all this together. Super insightful. Any last wisdoms or anything from your side, Simon?
No, just thank you, everyone. I really appreciate. I love to talk about this stuff. I hope it was useful. Thank you for the questions. I usually fill an hour because I can talk a lot, obviously, but I don't do it without everyone. So thank you.
Perfect. Then we can close it out here. Final word from other side. If you're looking how you're currently standing on the side of data and experimentation, we have an assessment that we can run with as workshop with companies. And on the format here itself, we really love bringing people together in this format. So if you also feel like you have something to share, we'd love to hear from you and look if we can have you as a next guest speaker as well. So and also very interested in your feedback on the format. If you have any ideas on topics or on the format itself, love to hear from you. Amazing. Thanks, everybody. And so thanks again,
Thank
Simon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.